Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Chavra.
Good morning.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three prakim Rambam. We're going to first learn the final chapter of Hilchos Metame Mishkav U'Moshav, and that will be Perek Yud Gimel. And then we're going to start Hilchos Sha'ar Avos Hatumos, learning both prakim Aleph and Beis. Beginning with, again, the final chapter, Hilchos Metame Mishkav U'Moshav Perek Yud Gimel, is going to tell us what one needs to do to secure the purity, the tara of one's wine, of one's oil, when one's workers are amiyaratzim. And Bachlal, we're going to see that when a person is guarding his food, thinking that they are chulin, even though he guarded it and he saw nothing tamei having any type of halachic contact with it. Nevertheless, if he later discovers that that food that he thought was chulin is truma, the food is considered to have been unprotected. And B'chlal, we're going to learn various, what we will call ma'alois, yiseros, stringencies that Chazal gave concerning taras, which makes its standard more stringent as anything that's not taras, as we'll learn. And without any further ado, Perek Shleisha Asar has 8 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. Kohen shetir kelev legazu. You have a kohen, and he purified all of the utensils needed for this grape pressing season. And now, v'hinicham legas haba, after the season is over, knowing that everything is pure, he wants to leave it. He wants to set it aside for the next season. So the halacha is harei elu becheskasan. They stay in their presumed status of them being pure. Because we do not suspect that Am Haaretz is going to enter a domain that belongs to a kohen and touch kalim. No, he's not going to do that. Because the Am Haaretz knows that the kohen is eating taras. But if this wine press, if this grape press belongs to a Yisrael, halacha is harei elu tameyos. Until the Yisrael says that belibi hoya lishmoed Am Haaretz, that I paid attention to guard, and de facto I guarded. I made sure that Am Haaretz will not enter my gas to touch the kelim. So there has to be a more active amount of shmira if the owner is a Yisrael. Halacha 2. Now let's speak about during the season proper. Person wants to make wine, but they're hiring workers that are not necessarily chavedim. So first of all, hareza matvel es haboitzim. He has to take to the mikvah already the workers that are harvesting the grapes off the trees. Now, we spoke about this quickly yesterday. Any product that grows on the ground, after it becomes disconnected, is not even susceptible to becoming tamei prior to it becoming wetted with any one of the 7 halachic liquids. When it comes to grapes, when you harvest grapes, some of the liquid of the grape proper can ooze out of the grape and render the grape wet. On some level, we consider those grapes already susceptible to becoming tamei, which then would mean that even if the one who's picking the grapes, who is tamei and Am Haaretz, he's bechet. We learned yesterday, pay tumas Am Haaretz, him touching the grapes will render the grapes tamei. So if you want to use workers that are amaratzim, you, the owner, the chaver, you have to actually take him to the mikveh. And if he's making oil, he has to take to the mikveh the workers that are in the press. In other words, he does not have to take to the mikveh workers that are going to be picking the olives off the trees, because halachically, the liquid that will seep out of the olives are considered insignificant, and they won't be able to be machsharet. But now, the ones who are in the press proper, well, then there's going to be oil. That oil is one of the 7 liquids. So you want to make sure that the workers are already after the mikveh. And it's not taking them to the mikveh to drop them off at the mikveh entrance. No. But he has to actually see them going under the water, because part of the laxity and therefore the ignorance that Amaratzim had was that they don't know all of the laws of chatzitza. So there might be something that halachically is considered a chatzitza, interposing the waters of the body. They might not know that. They might not know that all of the body has to go under the water. So you have to actually make sure that they are ready halachically, and you have to witness them going under the water. Now, if these workers leave the entrance to the olive press, why are they leaving? Because they have to relieve themselves. And if they're going simply to relieve themselves right behind the fence over there, that's fine. And then they right away return. And we don't have to suspect that while they left, they became impure. However, there's a limit to that. And that's only until when they are not hidden from his eyes. Now, we're not speaking about when they relieve themselves behind the fence. You're not seeing them, but you are in the region that if anyone else were to come, you were to see them. Once they're out of your vision, automatically, they automatically are considered halachically tameh. And the only solution would be, again, until they go to the mikveh. And by the way, whenever they go to the mikveh, it's not enough for them just to go to the mikveh, but you have to wait until it gets dark, right? And then can they continue to work, and you can have the status of tahara on your oil. Halacha gimel. Habadodim v'haboitzim shenimtzei stuma lufneihem. If a source of impurity is found right next to them, so ne'emanim, they are believed, loymar, to say, loy noganu, we did not touch it. And that's very important. Like we mentioned yesterday, and it's good to reiterate. We don't suspect that Ha'aretz is a dishonest person, God forbid. No, b'chlal not. We believe him. The reason why Chachamim gave him or her, the Ha'aretz, the status of Tameim is because they think they're tahor, but they're not. But if it's a simple, did you touch that? Did you not touch that? They have they're trustworthy like everyone else. In other words, even a child is believed to say, we did not touch the wine or the oil. Many times workers, they come to work with their kids. Now, even though you took them to the mikveh, you did not take their children to the mikveh. Child can become tummy just like an adult. Gewaldig. So we trust even a child to say regarding a simple thing, did you touch it or not? And if he says, I didn't touch it, then we don't have to worry. Not a source of tumah. Did you touch the wine or the oil? If they touch the wine and the oil, they are amaratzim, are b'cheskas tumah. They have the tumah sama'aretz, but we believe them. Okay, let's keep on going. A person, the balabas, he purified badodim, the olive press workers, and and he brings them into the into the factory. And he locks it while they are inside. If inside there are other kelim that already are impure because of midras, which means anyone who touches it will become a rishain, harei beis chabad kulei tamei, because shema nogo ba'isam kelim. Maybe they touched those kelim. And even if you saw them prior, and you saw that they were cautious not to touch it. Now again, we just said you believe them, yet you believe them if you ask them, did you touch it or not? Yet they'll tell you the truth. But if you remember that one of the ways that something that became tamei through midras could impart tumah is even only by moving it indirectly, without direct contact. And Ha'aretz, who doesn't know these dinim, will not consider that contact. So they're going to think there was no contact. Shema hisitu, maybe they did somehow do hesed, and ve'hei medamin, and because of their so far lack of knowledge, they think she'ein ha'meiseh tamei, because amaratzim are not knowledgeable with tumas hesed. You understand? It's very different if you find a carcass in front of them. Did you touch it? They say we didn't touch it. That's okay. But if they're locked in an environment where something is tamei b'midras, they might have done something. They might have been meisited, and there you go. Halacha, hey. Another case, you have a chaver, and he has donkey drivers or different porters that they are carrying, they're schlepping all of these pure foods or liquids, and the workers that are schlepping for you are walking in front of you, the chaver, which is good, which you're behind them. They know that you, the balabas, is behind them, even if he fligu yoisim a mil, even if they are already ahead of you. More than a mil is around a kilometer. Doesn't matter, it remains Tahiris. Why? Because they presume, correctly so, that you, the owner, you're guarding them. They don't know how far back you are. They are afraid to touch it because they say to themselves, I look around my shoulder, the Amaretz, he doesn't see the Balabas, but in any second he could appear. But that's only if the Balabas did not tell them how far back he will be. But if he tells them, listen here, so you go ahead, but I'll catch up. If he uses those words, then once they are no longer in his field of vision, then we say they're not that suspect that he's going to see them. They might touch it. They might not be aware of it. It's not called guarded. And automatically, all of your food stuff, imagine, become tamei. Chaver is wearing a tunic, and he's wrapped in a talis, and he's walking, and he's saying, I intend to guard the tunic, while I'm walking in the street, for making sure it doesn't become tamei. Very simple. If my clothing touch someone else, if that someone else is an Amaretz, my clothing will become tamei. Guy's wearing it and he's having in mind to guard it. But I was only guarding my chaluk, but I didn't pay attention to my talis. Indeed, so then we say the chaluk is b'tarasei because you were shoymering it, you were guarding it. It's a mental guarding. And the talis tameya because if you're not making this mental effort to guard it, maybe an Amaretz touched it and you're not aware of it. Chiddush over here is that, this for one garment, and for one garment not. Now let's put this to Caleb. You have a basket on your shoulders, and inside the basket there's some sort of pitchfork. And the same thing. Believe me, I am intending to guard my basket from any source of tumah. And now another nuance, I'm going to make sure that my pitchfork doesn't get in touch. Midavar hamitama. Now I want to take a moment to pause and just to make clear that whenever we're going to learn details of Tuma and Tara, you'll notice that sometimes we use the word pasul, sometimes we use the word tamei. Now I know that the word pasul is a very big word. It's not only used in the context of Tuma and Tara, but when it's used in the context of Tuma and Tara, there is a difference between pasul and tamei. Pasul means this item is at the end of the line. Tamei means not only is it tamei, but it still has the ability to impart tuma further. For example, when we learned that chulin can become max asheni latuma. If something that's asheni touches other chulin, we don't follow Rabbi Akiva. That is not tamei at all. So sheni is called pasul. We don't even call that tamei. Or let's say a truma can only become a shlishi. So if truma became a shlishi, we call that truma pasul. If truma became a sheni, we call that truma tamei, because not only is it tamei, if it touches other truma, it can even make that into a shlishi. So he said like this: I'm going to make sure that nothing will touch the magrefa that will make my pitchfork so tamei that it's able to pass on the truma. I'm guarding it from an av, because think about it: if an av touches the pitchfork akeli will become a rishon. Now I know, guys, that a keli cannot make a keli, but the pitchfork can make foods into a sheni. But I was not guarding it from a rishon. I was not guarding it from a lower level of tumah. So first of all, we say the basket is completely tahar because he intended to guard it entire. And the magrefa, here is the chiddush, tameyam. The magrefa is tamei. In other words, we say that it's tamei enough to be able to invalidate, to passel other foods. And therefore, v'chol truma shebasal will be psula. Because the magrefa is tameya, shepaisela so echel shebasal. In other words, there's different levels of shemira. And shemira for one doesn't go to the other. Furthermore, people, chavedim, they were using a barrel. There was wine in the barrel. They all thought that it's chulin. And they were guarding it. Because that was the whole point. Chavedim ate even their chulin with the same stringencies as if it is tahar. They made sure it's tahar, but they thought it's chulin. Then they discovered that the content in the barrel was truma. And by the way, these chaverim were kaihanim, let's say. There was no sin happened. They were guarding it, but they guarded it thinking it's chulin. The din is afal pi shehito hoida, because they guarded it. Nevertheless, harehi asura ba'achila. Of course, you can't say it's truma tameya. You can't burn it, but you can't eat it. Because Shema nagabal tvul yoim, maybe a tvul yoim touched it. And that's the power of the tvul yoim. He can only pasal truma. He does not pasal chulin kamashi yisbar. The guy is saying no one touched it, doesn't matter. The einu doima mishamer truma la mishamer chulin. So if you thought you're guarding it from one, it doesn't automatically keep it guarded from anything that's more chamor. But if he says, but if he makes it clear that even though I thought it was chulin, but I intended not to allow anything, even pasal. Another din, similar. You have Shabbos clothing, you have weekday clothing. We're speaking about a person that never wants to wear tummy clothing. The din is nitma'u. Wow. Because once he was wearing Shabbos garments, he thought they were weekday garments. Even though he was careful to make sure that his weekday garments don't become tamei, you could not rely on that for Shabbos. Wow. Amazing. It happened once, there were two women, both of them are chaveros. That when they went to the Beis HaMerchatz at the same time, each one took by accident the other's clothing. They realized that I'm wearing yours and you're wearing mine. And the Chachamim said, wow, that a person doesn't guard the other clothing from Tumah as much as they guard their own. Same idea. So even though they were guarding it, it's not valid for themselves. Even if one scarf fell. And the person who owns the scarf turned to another chaver or to a chavera. Tenoli, please give it to me. And she picked it up and she guarded it for a while and she gave it to Unasarala Nitmeis. Knows when I ask you, give it to me at that moment, even if I'm in the close proximity, I'm relying on your Shemitah, which means there was a moment that I wasn't guarding it, you were guarding my garment. And that's the word. Zera Shema Yitnenu La'ama. We are afraid that it can be passed through an Ama'aretz, or the chaver won't guard it as great, because she'ein adam mishamar kelim she'ein shaloi, as great as much as they guard their own kelim. Elim kein, but there is an exception. If I tell you, please guard my clothing, and I'm relying on you, if you say those words that I'm being soymach of, then I can rely on you. Without that statement, then it's called a lesser type of shmirah. Halacha zayin. Chaver shemeis. And if in his possession there's pure foods, we say they remain pure. But if in the possession of the chaver there are kelim, utensils, clothing, then we say harei heim tameim oigavald. They are tameim. Don't forget, my friends, kelim that become tamei can be made pure by taking to the mikvah, with the exception of klecheres. Food and drinks, I know the water, take out the water out. Once they become tamei, they cannot be tohar. So there's nothing wrong for a chaver to own and to keep in one's possession things that are tamei, because you can make them tohar. A chaver would not have in his possession tamei foods. You can't be metired them. Sha'ani yomer, because I say, Shema nitmu, maybe these items did become tamei. He's aleim bashlishi. Maybe they began the purification process, but you didn't still have the sprinkling of the seventh day. Or maybe Shema, even if it already went through the sprinkling of the seventh day, maybe it wasn't taken to the mikvah. Or maybe Bechlal didn't have any sprinkling yet. In other words, a chaver will not keep in his possession food that's tamei, because that cannot be made tahar. So the presumption is it's in his domain, it's tahar. Kalim, a chaver would keep and be metired, and maybe now it's not tahar yet, so he'd be metired. Now, halacha ches, the final halacha, mi she'amaloi eidechad. If a witness tells a person, I want you to know that nitmu tahari secham, right, your foods that you think are pure, I know they're tamei, and the owner who hears that reacts with silence is shoysek, he doesn't challenge it, harei zanema. In other words, that means, silence means, in most cases, you are agreeing. So therefore, Hareim Tameas, even though it came only from 1/8, when it comes to these halachas, 1/8 is Nema. But here's different. If a guy, someone tells the owner, your food, your wine, your meat, it's tummy. And the owner right away says, no, it's not true. I know, I was guarding it from the whole time. Then we give nemanus to the owner. Unless about if two people come, it's different. Another similar case. If one was working together with his friend, either with pure foods or with karbanos, and after a while, the chaver tells the owner, when he meets him, you remember we were working yesterday? The taharis that I was working with you, they became tamei. Or the carbon that I was involved with you became pigul. Now here there's a chiddush. Here one can argue, if that is the case, why did you not let me know right away? One might have said that. We don't say that. If someone notifies you they are tamei, again, if the owner doesn't challenge, then we believe him. But if not only when they were working together, he didn't say anything. When they met later for the first time, he also didn't say anything. When he met him for the second time, remember that thing was not tar, it was tummy, then he's no longer believed. Here it's too much. Why didn't you say it last time? This 1/8 has no credibility when it comes to that testimony. And with this, we conclude, at least on a positive note, your foods remain tar. Right? We bless the merciful one for helping us, for his assistance in helping us at least read through the series of Mishkav and Moshav. And now we are starting a new set of halachas. And as always, the first chapters are a lot simpler because we're getting less into details. We're speaking about the bigger picture. We're going to start what the Rambam calls Hilchos Sha'ar Avos HaTumos. It's the book of Tahara began with Tumas Meis. Now we're going into all other sources of Tumah of the level of an Av. And as we'll see in both chapters today, we're going to be speaking about an Avela, which means a carcass of an animal, of a non-domesticated animal, of a domesticated animal. And as we will also have some similarities between a dead creeper, a dead sheretz, but don't think that all of, like you kill a mosquito, you're not going to become tamei. The Torah enumerates 8 shiratzim. It goes without saying, so the Rambam is not going to mention it right now. Only they, when they are dead, also become a source of impurity. One of them is a mouse, a rat, a weasel. But it's good to know when you step on a cockroach, you're not going to become tamei because they don't impart tumah. Generally, nevela is what we refer to when we're speaking about an animal. Let's first read the header. We're going to have in this series of halachas, we're going to cover 3 positive mitzvahs, and these are its details. Number 1, din tumas nevela, the laws of impurity of an animal carcass. Din tumas sheretz, the laws of impurity of a carcass of a sheretz. But again, the Rambam is only referring to the shmoina shiratzim. And gimel, din tumas shichva zera, the impurity from semen. We're not speaking about the adam that becomes a rishon. Yeah, I know that. We're speaking about the semen itself. The zera itself is tamei on the level of an av. And now says the Rambam that any avodah zarah is metama kisheretz, imparts tuma like a sheretz. We'll see why he says sheretz and not nevela. The amount of sheretz needed is a lot less than nevela. However, tumas avodah zarah is midivrei soifrim. It's a rabbinic tuma. Ubir mitzvahs elu will be in the following chapters. So we're going to learn now about an avela, how an avela is an av. We're going to have a very important rule in the Rambam in this chapter. I know it's a by the way, but it's good to remember it because it will be the first time that we're learning it, that liquids that are tamei cannot impart tumah biblically. They definitely impart tumah rabbinically a lot, as we'll see. But it's amazing. Mashkin min atoiram cannot be metama, and an avela, as we're going to learn in this chapter, which is an av, that means the carcass or a part of a carcass from a dead, domesticated, non-domesticated, kosher, non-kosher animal imparts tumah only as long as it is edible for a dog. That's the lashon. The moment that nevela becomes so decomposed that even a dog won't eat it, it loses its status of nevela, which is something amazing. But something tamei becomes tahor. This chapter has 17 halachas. Perek Rishon has 17 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Let's go. Let's fly. It says the Rambam, hanevela, a carcass, right, is an av mi'avei satuma. It's very powerful. Av means, for example, if I touch it, I become a rishon. If I then touch foods and drinks, even though they're chulin, they become sheni, they become tummy. Kazayis mitzara, how much of it, even only an olive size portion from its meat, mitame and partuma, both to Adam and to Kalim through touch. It can also impart tuma if it entered the airspace of a klei cheres, as we keep on learning. And mitame so Adam bimasa, if a person carries it, even if he's not directly touching it, because I have on my shoulder a pekel, and on that there's another package, and on the 10th one on top there is an avela, kazayis avela. Not only do I become tamei, but here there's another detail. Guys, if I become tamei through touching a carcass, what do I become? I become a rishon. A rishon, biblically, can only impart tumah to food and drink. That means that the clothing that I'm wearing won't become tamei. My clothing are called kalim. But if I'm carrying an avela, while I'm carrying it, together with me becoming a rishon, the clothing that I'm wearing also becomes a rishon. L'tamei bigadim. Just like the din of a merkav hazav, if you remember. Okay, let me say, if the zav was riding on a saddle, if I touch the saddle, remember the saddle becomes an av, then I become tamei, but my bigadim don't become tamei. But we did learn that if I carry the saddle, if I carry a merkav of a zav, not only do I become tamei, it's amazing. My bigadim. Now, the Rambam is writing merkav, just to quickly chaza. We just had this in the previous section, because by the mishkav of the zav, by the moishav of the zav, they're more tummy than the merkav. There, even if I touch it, me and my clothing become tummy. But by the merkav, we don't do that. So just like there, we differentiate between touch and carry. Here also, the Rambam speaks it out. Ketzad, Adam should not get an avela. If I touch an avela, nitnu, and amarishin latuma. Which means that if I'm touching it while I'm clothed, my clothing will remain tahor. Why? Because I'm a rishon. I cannot be matama clothing. The im naga bekalim, even b'shas magoy banavela, even at the same time that I'm touching the nevela, I'm touching something else, they are tahorim. And the same thing is the kalim that I'm wearing. Why? Because I am only a vlad, and the rule is that a vlad cannot impart tuma to kalim. But if a person carries an avela, or like we said, even only a kazais from an avela, now, clothing that I'm wearing, other things that I'm touching at the same time. As it says clearly in the Torah, if you carry the carcass, you have to wash your clothing. Washing your clothing generally means taking it to the mikvah. Why? Because it's tamei. How did it become tamei? My clothing didn't touch the nevela, but my clothing and me are like one. Begodim are on the level of rishon, and those begodim. Oh, now while I'm carrying it, I can be matam the clothing that I'm wearing. When I'm carrying a nevela, I am matam kalim that I'm touching, but not another person, nor klei cheres. And that's based on a pasuk. The Torah says beged, beged metama. The eina matama adam, the eina matama klei cheres. Why do we separate them? Because beged can be made tar. Beged excludes adam, and here klei cheres is like an adam. Klei cheres cannot become tar. Halacha beis. Now a carcass from what? Says the Rambam echad behema v'chay. It doesn't matter whether it's a domesticated or non-domesticated, whether it's a kosher species, mutar machila bein asurim, whether they're not a kosher species. Both of them, all of them. If they die, that's the definition of an avela, right? We're going to learn a lot how shchita removes tuma, but they did not have shchita. They died, kulam, psaram, all of the above, their flesh, even not the whole carcass, will impart tuma, even only in the amount of a kazayas. Now, shchitas behemoth hoida, if you shech a kosher species, domesticated animal, and or if you shech bechayet hoida, there the rule is mitaharton b'chol makayim, that takes away that tumah. Now, taking away the tumah doesn't always mean that you'll be able to eat it. So even if a person, God forbid, shechted chulin ba'azara, which is a tremendous violation, or if you shechted kachim b'chutz, these are kachim b'chutz. If you shech, you're not allowed to eat. Doesn't matter. You're not allowed to eat. It has nothing to do with the din of tum and tara. Shchita removes tumas nevela. Now, the made of psul b'shchita, right? We learned in Ilcha Shchita, right? You have the 5 general halachas. What happens if a person broke any one of the 5 basic halachas, which means the shchita is not halachically valid? Then hareizu nevela. Even though you put the knife over the neck, you did derasa, you did chalada, you did shehiyah, it's not good. And now it's metama b'masa. It doesn't only mean b'masa. B'maga, b'masa, k'moshe b'yana b'ilcha shchita. Because as long as the shchita, I'll tell you more than that. We'll see either in this chapter or in the next chapter. Imagine if you shecht an animal that's treifa. Treifa means it has any of the shemoina of the tarfus. The animal may not be eaten. You were metayed it from the veil. A kosher shchita by kosher animal types. Now, if you do a kosher shchita to a chazer, we're going to learn about this. It doesn't do anything. But as long as it is to a kosher species, it's going to take away tumas nevel. Halacha gimel be'ema tameya v'chaya tameya ein hashchita me'elas ba. Shchita here is completely irrelevant. It's insignificant. So therefore, whether you took its life by shechting it, or if you were noicher it either means stabbing or noicher means ripping out the simanim, or if you strangle it, or if the animal died naturally, makes no difference. Another interesting detail. They're so same that here, if you have a half a kazayis of cow that was not slaughtered, and a half a kazayis of a donkey, they're mamish the same. Since it's the same tumah, it's the same shame, you combine one with the other. Halacha dalet, mayach, marrow is flesh. That's very important. We'll see that bones do not impart tumah. Flesh does. So what happens is we're going to learn details about the kulis. Remember, there are certain bones that they are sealed like a thigh bone, but they're filled with marrow. Marrow, to begin with, has a din of a basar. Dam nevela, einoi metamek nevela. Remember this, guys. The blood of a nevela, very unlike, let's go back to tumas meis. If you remember the vias of dam that left the body after death in parts, I think even tumas oil. Or if not, it's definitely metama tumas meis if there's contact, right? We don't say that by an animal. Now, it is mashkin tameim, but it doesn't part tumah because it's considered mashkin tameim. And here the Rambam writes this big rule we have to remember. Midrabanan will see mashkin tameim. Oh boy, does it impart in tumah. We're going to see at the Rabbanan that when mashkin become tamei, they rabbinically always go back to be a rishon, even if really it should have been on a lower level. But forget about rabbinics. We'll get to that later. Midoiraisa mashkin cannot impart tumah. And it's very important to know that. So just for example, if truma becomes tamei, if it's tumas only midrabanan, you can't burn it. You're not allowed to burn it. You have to be toiling. If it's tamei, you're chayiv to burn it. Okay. Halacha hey. Chelav behema tohayna. The first chapters are always so easy, just the general rules. So chelav. What is chelav? What are the fats? So he said like this: if it's from a behema tohayna. Now, guys, we're speaking about David, a behema tohayda that died. The behema is an avela. An avela. Its chelav is not impure. The Torah writes that explicitly. It says v'chelav nevela, v'chelav treifa, chelav nevela. The Torah says yehi asa l'chol malacha. You can use it for whatever you want, even though you're not allowed to eat it. So what do we say? Mishe isurei mishum nevela utreifa. That is where chelav does not impart tumah. But what are we trying? What is the Rambam trying to say? Chelav from an animal that may not be eaten, not because of nevela. Chelav from an animal that's tameya, from a non-kosher species, that will be something different. Well, however, if it became wet, then hareyu ka'oicholen tameyim, but ve'ena k'psar nevela. Now, what's going to be amazing, the Rambam is really saying, is that if it got wet, even if the chelav did not touch a source of tumah, it will impart tumah seicholim. But on what level is it tamei? Guys, remember that. Oicholim will be tamei on the level of a rishon. So that's a huge difference. So it's this chaylev that Rambam is saying. It's not of chaylev of a kosher species animal, even if it's an avela. It's taught. It's taught from tumas nevela. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be considered, if it got wet, food that's tamei. Food that's tamei in parts, but you're beginning with a rishon and not beginning with an av. Now, there are certain fats that surround the kidneys. Guys, we're all speaking about an animal that was not slaughtered, which means the meat of it is nevela. We just said the chaylev is not nevela. Hold on. That chaylev around the kidneys are like as if you touch the kol. You will become tamei. It is an av because kamachuten, because there are many strands of flesh that go into the fat. So that fat we view as meat. And meat is tamei, nevela. Aval behema tameya. But let's go back to the beginning of this whole context about chaylev or behema tameya. One category. And chaya, chaylev chaya. It's amazing, guys. Chaylev chaya, chaylev behema may not be eaten. You know what we get? They get karas. Chaylev of a behema, even if the behema was shechted, we learned this before. It's worse than chazer. We can't do anything that God said not to do. Chaylev of a chaya becomes mutter when you shecht it. Oh, which means chaylev is considered meat. You can eat it. So chaya, even if it is tahoira, of course, if it is tameya, dear, if the animal is nevela, then echad basara the echad chabal is latuma. It's called nevela, and therefore it's coming the level of an av, not like the chaylev of a behema. Even if it became a huchshad b'mashkin, it's only a rishon. Umetama adam b'kelim because I saw nevela. So remember that. So chaylev behema of a nevela is not metame. It's not a nevela. Chaylev chaya, and it's consistent because if you shech the animal, you can eat it. That means it's considered food. Now that the animal was not geshacht and it has a din of an avela. So now the question will be, what happens to those animals that are safek chay, safek behema? Hakoi, whatever the koi is, it's a question whether it's a behema or a chaya. So here we say, why is that? Because maybe it's a chaya, but since it's a maybe it's a behema. So this tuma is a tuma misafik. And here the Rambam writes, we keep on learning this. You have to know whether it's vada or safik. For example, if it's a safik, because for safik, you're not allowed to burn. Also, the ein chayav and kolas, if someone did have contact with chaylev of a koi, and then they entered the Beis Hamikdash, or they ate kachim, they're not going to be chayav kolas because it's a tuma misafek. Now, halacha zayin, so chaylev is unique because we differentiate behema and chayav. Let's move on. And when it comes to an avela, let's go back to the cow. The cow died. These parts of the animal is not considered meat. The atzomos, the bones, the akarnaim, the horns, hatilofayim, the hooves, and how deep into the animal, afilu ikaron harach, even the soft portions, soft meaning that when you cut that part of the hoof off, blood will leave, still called the hoof. Where does it end exactly? I don't know. We need pictures for that. And generally the hide, even though the hide was not yet worked into leather, so it's, it's the way it was, you just cut it off the animal. The ha'alal, if you remember, we learned about ha'alal is that when you cut off the skin, if you don't know what you're doing, it's like I mentioned, when you cut an apple, when you want to take the peel off an apple, right, for Pesach. Well, my mother did it, amazing, I don't know how she did it. The peel is off and the apple is there. When I take the peel off the apple, most of the apple is with the peel. You have to, So halal means someone skinned the animal, they didn't know what they're doing, and there are pieces of flesh that stuck to the hide. Even that flesh, it's about your machshavit. You put it together with the hide. You give them all of the sinews. The merek is going to be sauce. That means if you took any of the above and you made a chicken soup, so you would think that now it's an avela, guys. Now it's soft. No. The hakavlin and the spices that are put with it, none of this are going to be metame. All of the above. When these items were removed from the animal after it died, If the animal died and you did not remove them, the horns are on the animal, the hooves are on the animal, the hide, you touch the hide, you can't say, I touched the hide. Of course you touched the hide. If no one skinned the animal, you'll be touching the hide. But when is the tummy? As long as on the other side of the horn of the hide, there is a kazayas of basar. And it is not part of the kazayas. Can't say now that it's connected. No. And now let's go to the alal. So I have a hide. You have pieces of meat that are still stuck to the hide because the guy didn't know how to skin it. Now you also have times that you have an alal, not because a person skinned the animal, because a wild animal jumped on the behemoth and it ripped off a piece of a hide and the piece of a meat. That's another case. Halal, whether the flesh is on the hide and that entire chunk was ripped off by a wild animal, whether it was cut off by a person that was trying to skin the animal. In both of these cases, that hide, like we mentioned in Halacha Zayin, is not going to combine, but more than that. In other words, if you have a little piece here and a little piece there, that's the question. In other words, you have a half a kazayas here and you have a half a kazayas there, and they're both stuck onto the hide. They're not considered together. The alal does not combine them. Now, if you took off that meat and you put it together, then it is mistarev. Mistarev like a zayis. Halachates. Te'elu behemois. However, there are certain animals where there is an exception. And we say that hide is meat. Number one, the hide of a domesticated pig. It's obviously a very soft hide. If you have a soft, camels, prior to them using them to carry your stuff, so their humps, the chatiteres, the skin on it is very soft. That is considered flesh. The skin of the genital area. Skin of a fetus, like an animal, but it's a fetus. And the hide directly below the tail, the fatty tail. They are considered flesh. Now, however, if you take that and ibdan, you process them, or if you trampled on it in order for you to process them, now they are no longer considered meat. Now they are considered oil, and they are tahoiden. The imasa behemaisa should be one, right? If you did something that negated their use as meat, then they are also tied, even though you didn't work it, you didn't trample on it. He gives an example. If someone took off the ear of a donkey, right, and he put it on his basket, making it into the handle of the basket. Very shkoyach. He didn't take the fat out. He didn't work it. It's going to stink. But he did something that shows I'm using it functionally, not for me. That's it. Now, going back when we spoke about treading on a hide, how much time do you need to have people treading on it for you to say, now it's already mu'ubad? The time that it takes to walk 4 mil, with the, machlekes, we know in halacha, we know for Shabbos, for many other halachas, is mil 18 minutes, is mil 24 minutes, or in between. Whatever the halacha is, it's going to be over here as well. The ezihi chati teres raka. How do you define a soft camel hump? Not about the age, it's about whether the camel was used to be a schlepper. Now, what happens if the camel is old enough to be able to schlep stuff, but no one used it yet? Or if someone de facto used the camel when it was still too young? Here, that's a suffix. And guys, it's simple. Whenever there's a suffix, so we're going to say it's tamei suffix. And ein surf and satruma, you're not going to be chayiv kadis. You're not going to be chayiv the oil of a yored carbon. Because it's a suffix. Halacha. Hamafshid nivlas behema oichay. Okay, a person is skinning a carcass. Ben Tamea, Ben Tohoida, Ben Daka, Ben Gasa. Now, in Lesheticha Hifshit, in other words, if you took it off because you want to make the hide into a mat, and just to know the technique there, they would skin it to the length of the animal. They would begin with the tail and they would go to the neck and they would remove it in that direction. And then they can make skinnier strips after they removed it, but they have the whole length of the hide intact. The moment you removed enough hide that you can grab onto, which is the length of 2 tfachim, now listen to the word, David, some of it is still connected. We said before that when the hide is connected to the animal, if there is kazayas meat, then you become tummy. But if you touch that part that's already removed, we say it's considered removed. Then prior to you removing that shear, if you touch, even though some of it was already removed, it's considered connected. And now, a person will become a rishon. A keli will become a rishon. If you want to use the skin into a flask over there, they would not skin it to its length. That's the way it worked. They would skin it. They would go under the stomach, shmuli, like from foot to foot. What they really want to do is they want to get the width intact. If you just think about how you make a flask, if the width isn't task, all now you'll need to do is you'll have to make a knot here and a knot there. That's the way they skinned it. There, all of the hide is considered connected only until when you skin the entire under, chest of the animal. Much more than 2 tfachim is needed for you to be able to consider that disconnect. Another thing is they would only remove the hide from the legs. They would make also skinnier pouches to hold liquid. Again, the part is when you remove the hide of the leg, what you'll basically have is you'll have the width will be intact, and then both edges, if you knit it up, that's what they use then for a kelim. So then until it's fully removed, we consider it connected, and therefore touching it is like touching the meat. If there's a kazayis of meat left on the animal proper, there it has to be complete, even more than the chemis. By chemis, at least if you did, I think, a 180, all of the hide on the chest, that's already considered, even though you still have to go around the back, it's already considered now disconnected. The part that's disconnected, here the whole thing has to be removed. Oh, no, we're speaking again. We're only speaking about the Shmoyne Shiratzim, and you're skinning the hides of these crawling animals. We don't say that if you removed some of it, at least that part is considered disconnected. We don't say that. By Shiratzim, it's only considered disconnected if it's fully removed. Another rule: the hide that's on the neck is also chibur. If it's considered connected, it's a two-way street. So, for example, you're asking, I'll tell you an example. If you shechted the animal, shechita is metayed tumas nevela. But if now something tamei touched the animal, the blood of the shechita was machshir the animal. So it acquires tuma. But what happens if the source of tuma did not touch the animal, it touched that part of the hide that's disconnected? Same rules. If it's considered connected to in part, then it's considered connected to acquire, not only acquire for it and the meat, because it's considered one. Not only is that part tummy, the meat becomes tummy. At least we're consistent. Halacha Yudal. Oh, so now what did we say? That it's connected to a kazayas nevela, the hide in parts tuma. Sometimes there are little strands that extend. That strand, the shmuli has nothing on it. There's no meat on it, but it's part of it. So I guess if the strand that's extending is opposite it, you have the meat, then you become tamei. Because just like the hide is considered the shomer and therefore connected, even that strand is also guarding the meat. Anything that's opposite the meat. When there's meat on it because a wild animal ripped it apart and therefore removed the hide with this meat. But if someone that was killing the animal didn't do such a good job and he left accidentally, that's called the alal. So now it depends. If it's thin, if the meat is thin, even though the meat spread out would be a kazayas, then it's batal legabe ha'or. Batal legabe ha'or. Halacha Yud Beis. So if I touch the hide, I'm not going to become tummy. So there's a hide, and you have two pieces of meat. So the din is, you don't say that the hide has on it a total of a kazayis. No, we don't say that. We say that the meat is considered insignificant to the hide, and it does nothing imparts to it. However, if you take two chatzoi zaysim and you connect them, how because you put them, in a what's it called, that a shish kebab? What is that thing called? You have that stick and you stick on it two half a kazaysim. Hanasei oisam tome, because you carry the kazayis. They're not bottled. They're not on anything. They're not on the hide. The hide is chashav. Yeah, they're on the stick. They're not bottled to the stick. However, why? Because you only touched one part. They're together. We already had this rule. She'ein chiburei adam chibur. However, now the vahu is going back to the beginning. The vahu is not going back to the ein chiburei adam. The liability of carrying together is only sheyu shneim mirudadim udvukim zebazef. Only they're mamish, they're flattened out, and now they're mamish stuck together. A lot of each side is touching the other side. But if you didn't properly stick them together on this case, even though they're both stuck into the stick, they're not considered connected, even for noisei and afilu hoylach behavior kolayim kula you're taught. Halacha Yud Gimel. Guys, these are the rules. Remember, sad nevela shenifsad behavish. You have basar nevela. It's matama b'kazayis. Until what point? The beauty of Yiddishkeit is not becoming tummy. The truth is not happens. But you know what? Things that are tummy can become tar. Things that thank God. So even though it's psar nevela, at some point, if it gets dried out, if it gets ruined, but how do you define that? What's the red line? The halacha is it becomes tar. It automatically becomes tar. And therefore, Nitzal Nevela, guys, remember Netzel, we learned this in Tumas Meis. Remember that if you have some of the body, while it decomposes, can become a putrid liquid mess. It can become a liquid. That's called Netzel. So Netzel of a Nevela, there's a suffix in Metana B'Kazayis Imloi. And obviously, guys, we're speaking about that it's puzzle from Achilas Kelev. Why would Netzel be different? Because since we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that Netzel of Adam is metame, we don't know whether that halacha l'Moshe Sinai goes to an animal. So therefore, even though it doesn't fit the rule, this is not meat, this is Netzel. Maybe there's a unique din of Netzel. Huh? Dam, we already said amazing before that Dam is not metame from Nevel. Dam will be a mashkin tame, David. That's why I mentioned that. A good contrast. Dama from a human is. I probably forgot whether it's boil. I think even boil, if it's a revis. Yeah, very good. I mentioned this before. We have to remember more. Hashem should help us. Now, it's not possible machilas kelev, but there's also something, it's so dry. It's not meat. So here we had this rule before. If you soak it in lukewarm water for 24 hours and it's going to go back to the way it was, and then a dog would eat it, even prior to you doing it, it's still metame. Yes. If it's in another detail, if it's not roy lachilas kelev, not only is it not nevela, guys, nevela is an av, but maybe you would think it's at least tame food, rishon. Not even that. Halacha yudal. Sar nevela shoyis ruach meikaroim. It's amazing. This is an interesting thing. Nevela normally means the animal dies. You know what happens when the animal dies? Right away, another animal can eat it. A kelev can eat it. We use the kelev because remember we learned that a kelev, it takes more time for it to digest the food because in nature, kelev has the least amount of food. So it eats anything, right? That expression that maybe that's hungry like a dog, right? Kalba, savua. Anyways, so the din is like this, that if from the outset, when the animal died, it was already so decomposed that it's not roy l'maychol adam, then hareze tahor. Wow. It says, which means who's not bound by the laws of kashrus. And if not, it's not Tommy Nevel. Halacha Tezvav. Shil Yeshal Nevela. If you find the placenta inside the carcass, inside of the veil of an animal, it has the status of perishikri'i, of waste matter, of feces, which means it's not meat. However, look at what your power is of intent. If the person had a mind to eat it, then your kavana cannot render it into halachic nevela, but yes, mistame tumasei cholin. In other words, when you intend to eat something, it becomes food. Now, food can acquire tumah, but that's a whole different thing. It doesn't have inherent tumah. It's not a nevela, but it can become a rishon. Hakeva v'hachalav shel nevela, another thing. So you have in the stomach, you're going to have a dried milk, right? Or you can have even liquid milk in the stomach of a carcass is completely pure because they are considered waste product. If an animal discharges coagulated blood, even though when it comes to the dinim of Bechira, we say that in there was a child, and the next animal, even if it's male, is not the Peter Echem, it's going to pater the next one from Bechira, all based on it being a fetus. Oy bazoi, let it have tumas nevela. Eino metama. Wow. Only if you can see, you can discern the form of that whatever that animal is. Why? Because this type of coagulated blood has beroiv blood and other animal parts. That's not part of the navel proper. So the navel that got dissolved in it is batal, even only beroiv, and therefore it's the haidam. Again, agav ime. It's not pater because of halacha yudalit. It's pater because when it came into the world, it was beroiv, not fetus. And final halacha yud zayin nevela shenis arva b'shchuta. Here you go. If a piece of meat on nevela, piece of meat of shchuta, what do? So we say like this: if the majority pieces here were from shchuta, all you need again is bittul beroiv batla nevela b'shchuta. And therefore, no piece individually is given matama b'mago. But if you carry all of them, then you become tamei. If you carry all of them, because you don't know which one is which, but if you carry all of them together, then for sure you carry the meat of the carcass. Now, 1 second. What's going to happen, David, if I touched every one? So the way it works is, the ikradin, when I touched one at a time. When I touched this one, then you have to ask halachically, well, which one was it? I touched shchuta. Even though I ended up touching all of them, we have the similar when there's people who learn smicha. I'm not talking about the Rambam. We're machmer Ashkenazim, but the ikradin, you have 3 pieces of meat, even obereif, one avela and one, and they look identical, and they all got mixed up. There's no mixture of tam. They're in the freezer. So al pi halacha, you can eat all 3 as long as you don't eat them together. We don't do it. Ashkenazim do it. We throw one out. Because when you take one, you ask this, roif. And even when you already ate 2, but you knew you had 3. So when you take the final one, is this the kosher or treif? Well, there were 3. The treif is in the roif, is in the other 2. This is kosher. Same thing over here. Now, the reason why the meat of the carcass is batal, she'i efsher l'shchuta, shetachser nevela. In other words, we're speaking about maga. We want to understand why is it? How can you be mevatel it? Shchuta cannot become nevela. Shchuta can never get a status of nevela. Nevela could become tahor if it becomes inedible even for a dog. Which means what's more powerful, shchita or nevela? Shchita is so strong. The status, the halacha of shchuta can never go away. How great is this thought? The status of nevela can go away. So we allow for there to be a bittul of nevela and shchuta. Lefikach tibatel. Why do you need to have a rationale? Is a good question. But he's explaining some things are never batel. It's easy for nevela to become batel. Beautiful. And today's final chapter the second chapter of Hilchoi Sha'ar Avos Hatuma. Guys, we're going to continue to learn the din of a nevela. We're going to learn something amazing in the beginning. Guys, halt up. We began in the first chapter by saying that shchita is metaher a behema and a chaya from a kosher species from tumas nevela. We mentioned even if the animal turned out to be a treifa, which means that you can't eat it. You shechted kachem bachutz, you can't eat it, but it's not going to be tamid ben nevela. But we mentioned that shchita does not have any effect over non-kosher animal types. Now we're going to learn an exception in the beginning of Perek Sheni that shchita on a behema chaya tameya, a proper shchita will have some effectiveness. It will have some gavaldik. It's going to do something in certain circumstances. We're going to learn a lot about how do you view meat that was removed from a behema chaya while they were alive. Now, if you remember, David, also by a person, remember Evim and Achai, Evim and Ames, right? The power, it has to be matame. We're going to have a lot of crossover halachas by a behema also. And don't forget that goyim will also have an effect on some of the halachas. Our mitzvah not to have Ever Menachai, Basar Menachai, they're not allowed to eat it. And that's going to affect some of what we're learning right now. Perek Sheni has 12 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Guys, let's get excited. This is amazing. Halacha aleph, behema, oichaya, temeya. Shenishchata. Now, just to make it clear, it was geshacht and shmuli by a yid. Okay? He did an act of shchita that if this would have been done to a cow, the cow would be kosher. Now, in the last chapter we learned, it's nothing. 1 second. The behema, so he says that eina mitama mishum nevela kolzman shehi mifarkeses. Listen to this. As long as the animal is still convulsing, prior to it dying, it will not yet impart to us nevela. Only if you cut off the head. If you cut off the head, even if the animal is moving around, that's dead. And now, 1 second, it doesn't have tumas nevela, but still, it will already have the status of oichlin tameim. Oichlin tameim means, just for example, if the shchita or is the dam that goes out through shchita is machshir all of the animal. If something tamei touched it, it's considered already food. This is considered food, and therefore it could acquire, but it becomes tamei on the level of a vlad. Fine, but now if you have a kibetza, right, that touches other foods, even chulin, it will make it into a shem. The Rambam just wants to make it clear. It's not that it's not recholin, but it's not an avelim. Now this is amazing. It will become an avelim in a moment, but until then, it's not. Now 1 second. What's the chiddush? He wants to make a point. We're middle of Aleph. But if nechara, just an example, if someone killed this animal, guys, we're speaking about non-kosher animal species. Kosher animal species, you do shchita, will never become an aveil. If you stabbed it to death, right, and you stabbed it, and prior to dying, it's also convulsion. You didn't cut the head off. There, here it's different. Not only, no, it's the rule that nevel is only by death, that is good. But if you did an act which would not be matir a yid eating a kosher animal species, if you did not do that, then until it dies, it doesn't even have the status of a cholim. Once it dies, David, it's called an avail. It's amazing. He's just showing you the power of shchita. You know what shchita? No, it doesn't. No. If it has a status of food, it could acquire and impart tumas echalim. So it's a crazy thing. In other words, the effectiveness of shchita is that it renders that animal into food. So even though it's only available when it dies, but it did something. Okay, now. Yeah, therefore, and it's not nevela, it's even better. Okay, now the Evera Poidish min Farkeses. Now, by the way, this line is not only in the cases that we mentioned, just to make it, this line is even David, an animal that's kosher also. Kosher animal, a yid shchita. The animal is still convulsioned, also in this case. And an Ever left. Now, what's the din? Asur livnei noyach kipoidish min achai. Let's say the animal is alive, doesn't make a difference. Ubsara hapoidish mimenu is like meat that's poidish min achai.
After it stops convulsion?
No, then it becomes an avela if it wasn't geschachten. But I'm saying an aver, another rule. An aver that leaves an animal that's undergoing pirkos is like, since from the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noyach, a goy cannot eat it, it's kepoidish min achai, and we'll see in a moment, but it's still being mifarcheses. Or if you only shechted one or the majority of one. In other words, if the act of shechita is nothing, then there's no tuma at all until the animal dies. But amazing. But if you did shechita, temeya, it's gevaldik. You did shechita to a chazer. If you did a proper act of shechita, it's considered food between the end of the shechita and death. Food, you can't eat it. It's time to know if it's metam, you have to know the dinner. Okay, right. Now, Chazal called this a gistera. If you cut an animal into two, the way Hashem did it by the Brisam and Absarim, or that's like cutting the head off. That's not called even if it moves. If you moved a thigh, but not only the thigh, you move the thigh and the inner cavity of the thigh, then it's already considered an avela, and therefore it's even if the rest of the animal is still so to say alive. How can you cut an animal in half? If you cut an animal in half, not to the length, to the width. By the bris ben absarim, the animals were cut in the length. The width, Mustama can live another few seconds. Oh, there's a certain point where there's no in between shchita. If the animal was ripped apart from its back, we had these dinim also by a human being. Or if the backbone was broken together with the majority of the meat around it, all of these cases, even if the animal is moving around, it automatically has a din of an aveh. Halacha base. If a fetus dies in the womb of the animal, and now the shepherd is putting his hands in there, he wants to remove it and he touches it. Says that Rambam, whether this is a behemoth tamea species, whether it is a behemoth kosher species, because of a rule that we learned before, that what? Yes, this fetus is going to be matama, but it's only matama when it enters the world. And as long as it is in the mother's womb, what do we say? It's considered part of her body. And where does that come from? Don't forget, it goes in it's a two-way direction. If you shech the mother, so the shechita is moiled for the animal inside of it. You see, it's part of the mother's body. The mother is alive. You cannot have tumas navel. What happens if meat was cut off, was separated from the animal while they were still alive, whether it's a kosher animal or not a kosher animal species, they are tahar and they're not matamic in avelam. That is only if it's a piece of meat. But if an entire aver, remember we learned aver means aver, basar, atzam is basar begidim, aval aver menachaya, poirish mihem. They do impart tumas nevela. Echad aver menachai hapoirish min abehema atzma, or a aver hapoirish min ashlil shemabitna. Even though we began by saying that while the shlil isn't the betan of the mother, it's considered the mother. But if then a limb was ripped off, aver will be matamic in avela. And what amount? No kezayas here. Even if it's only the size of a sa'ida, or even smaller, if that's the size, because we're speaking about a shalil, it can be a very small animal. Betame, as long as, and how do you define a natural limb as it is when it comes into being? It has to be comprised of all basar and gidim and atzamais. Another detail, that even if some of the basar is missing, if there is enough, if the animal would have been alive and this limb would have been connected, if there is enough there to regenerate itself, that's considered basar. There's a little bit of meat, but if the animal would have been alive or if the limb would have been connected, it's not enough to regenerate, or any amount of the bone is missing, then even minachai, right, is tahar. Halacha dalet, kulya, the kidney, the lashon, and the tongue, basaf, and the lips. These are limbs that don't have bones. and they don't regenerate, since they don't have a bone, they have a din of a basar, and that's halacha gimel. Guys, remember, basar hapoidish from a living animal, tahar. Aver menachai is metame. There you go. Halacha habasar, or an aver the sugya of middul dalim, right? That in Cholin we learned this. So they're dangling, they're hanging loosely. What status do they have from a behemah, from a chaya? Dangling means that if the animal will stay alive, that will not heal itself. Einon metamim kinevela, as long as the animal is b'chaim. However, so on one hand, if it would be disconnected, right, an avid, it would be tamei nevela. No, it's not nevela. On the other hand, it has a status of food, which means that if it now becomes mukhshar, it's amazing. They're mekabel mituma even while it's attached to the animal. Mekabel mituma b'mekayma. Go figure. Now, nishchata behema of the animal now is slaughtered, and as we already mentioned before, that the blood that leaves the animal during shchita, dam is one of the 7 liquids, and it's machshir the entire animal. Hochsharu ba shchita gewalt. Wow. Ve'ein metamim kinevela. We don't say that now that you did shchita, it's as if it would. Now, if shchita would be considered as if perishu machayim, that we just learned, right? I know there's a difference between basar and aver, but aver hapoidesh menachai, aver kibriyasa is metamim benavela. We don't say that. But if the animal wasn't slaughtered, the animal died. Now we say that the meat, the meat needs to be muksher. The meat has a din of meat, not nevela. It has a din of cholin only. Because even menachai. But the eina metame mishum ever menanavel. It's like Aver Menachai. Now the question is, Atkan, the Rambam did not make any difference. We said that an Aver Hapoidish Menachai is Matamek and Avela. Why? There is a difference. So even though death will make this limb to be considered disconnected not after death, pre-death. Let's remember, there's a big cloud, that meat that later was taken off the Aver Menachai, even if the amount of meat is a kazayas or more, since to begin with, the tumah is called Aver Menachai. Yeah, atzama is basar and gidim together is matame, but a part of it is not. But basar hapoidesh me'aver min hanuvela will be matame because I don't masa. Now the Rambam writes, in other words, a complete limb makes no difference. Makes no difference. Come on. So we mentioned in this by heart in the previous chapter, we're speaking about a kosher animal species, behema or chaya, and the animal is a treifa. There is a hole in the lungs. The shchita won't be matered the animal to be eaten. Today it's going to be on the set aside. But for the dinim that we are learning about, we're not learning about machalas asaras. We're learning about tumantara. And inside the animal, you find a fetus that's dead. Since you shechted the mother, shchitas imay metaharte midei nevela. Wow. Same rule, guys. When the fetus is in the animal, it's not considered to be an independent entity. It's considered to be one of the limbs of the mother. And therefore, the shchita removes nevela, or does not allow, really, for tumas nevela to take hold. It doesn't allow it to take hold on this dead fetus. If you find in this animal a ben shmoina chai, ben shmoina means we're speaking about the type of animal that needs 9 months of gestation, of development, and it's, in other words, it's too young. So the din is nitraf. That animal is usher to be eaten as if it's a treifa. That's the meaning of the word nitraf over here. Very important. No, since it's not expected to live, shchita doesn't do anything to it. And by the way, that means even if you shech such an animal, just to know, it won't be acceptable. The difference is by a person, you only find out whether it was fully gestated or not after 30 days. And by animals, you need 7 days, no matter what type of animal it is. Here, not only will you not be allowed to eat it, it's going to have tumas nevela. It's any animal that was never allowed to be eaten, unlike a normal treifa, will remain unavailable. And when you have a doubt how long it was gestating, you don't know if it was full term, and the simon by a behema is 7 days. That's why by kachim, the Torah says you can only shech it from the 8th day and on. But here we're not speaking about kachim. It doesn't matter. See, there's a doubt whether it is a ben shmoy naschai. That's what we're talking about. Because we will give it the status of a neifel. So yeah, the rule is shchita, even by a treifa, removes the status of the nevela, but by a neifel it does not. Beautiful. And you find in it ben tishachai. Prior to this animal that's alive, walking on the ground, even though it does not have its own shchita, as we learned, my friends. Oh, the din is that what we learned this in Machalas Vasurois, Hare Shchitas, Share Shchitas Metahartoi. Very good. Im nitmeis imoi. If the mother became impure, that means after the mother was slaughtered, guys. Some source of impurity touched the animal. So you would argue, hey, you don't have to shech the fetus. Why? Even though it's alive, when it's in the mother, it's considered part of the mother. Well, if it's considered part of the mother, why don't we say that if the mother now becomes tummy, it becomes tummy? We don't say that. Lo nitmahu. Why? Because you're right, when something is in the mother, it's considered part of the mother. That's only prior to shechit. Now that you shechted the mother, it is considered a separate entity, and therefore it does not become tummy together with the mother. Im nesabla imoi, harehu tahar. Same thing. If the mother died, this fetus 9 months is alive, it does not become tummy. She'ein hachai mistame, you can't, it's a living. Not tumas richalim, not tumas nevelis, even though it is considered in other areas of halacha like a ever me'ever. Now, the mother died. The baby is the fully developed baby, but it died itself prior to going on the ground. Let's go back to the case where you shechted the mother. Even though it died, it remains tahor. Why? Because the shechita of the mother was effective for it. And that's the rule. Any animal that underwent shechita will not acquire tumas nevela. Like we mentioned, that the shechita is effective, not to eat it, but it removes the tumah. That's shechita minatoiram. Here, as we had in the previous segment, when it comes to certain dinim of kachim, im nagaba hakodesh, then midrabanan it becomes tamei, and it's only a rabbinic law, and that's one of the malas yisedos that Chazal gave to kachim, that we do consider this animal, since it's a treifa, you can't eat it, it imparts tumah. Midrabanan, for kachim only. Halacha 9. You have a child that's having a hard, an animal that's having a hard time giving birth. And during that time, just an example, the fetus extended its foot, its hand. And the person out there, to save the mother, cut off that hand. And then you shechted the mother. Now, what did we say before? That the shechit of the mother is effective for the child. How does it affect that limb? Ha'ever shenechtach is an avela, because it was not part of the fetus when you shechted the mother. However, usha'ad basar ubar remains tahor, because that's the rule. Something that's in the mother is purified with the shechita of the mother. Shachad asimoi, while the hand was extending outwards, and only then did you cut it off. So now we say the Eved is ketreifa shenishchatam. Since the limb was extended chevra outside the body before the animal was slaughtered, that limb is considered treifa. Meaning of treifa is something is not where it belongs. And a shchit, a treifa that's slaughtered, the rule is can't eat it, but it's not tamei. Usha'ar b'sar ha'ubar is like maga treifa shchuta. 1 second, we just said that if it's slaughtered, you go no. For kachim, we just mentioned halacha ches, and therefore shematamas hakodesh avaloi esatruma. Next, another case. Hoitzi ha'uber es yadei. In middle of a shchita between shechting one semen and the other, and then it was right away cut off. Here we have a leniency since it was inside the womb while you began the shchita. It's not a shchita simen l'simen, and yes, that limb was not allowed to become an avela because it was considered to be inside the womb during the entire shchita. Halacha yud shchita sanachi is completely insignificant. It has no effect. And therefore, even if he did the job perfectly, the animal has a tumah of nevela, and therefore it's matama even b'mas. And the yid knows that the guy did a good job. Doesn't matter. Furthermore, the im means afilu. Maybe the gear says afilu. The im shachad b'sak and yafas still shchita doesn't make a difference, and that is true both by a goy or by the kuti or by a ger toishav. Their shchita is ineffective, and therefore, in our context, when it comes to nevela, shchitas and nevela. Now, the Rambam writes like this: the words for cut of be'enai, just to make it clear, is not a certain psak din. The Rambam was not certain because of his uncertainty, especially since he was leaning more on one side. There's going to be a consequence, but don't misread the cut of be'enai as a psak from Vadai. The cut of be'enai, it's the Rambam writes that according to my estimation, sha'av zemed divrei seifrim. In other words, this tumah, guys, achila, no doubt, the shchita of a goy will not allow you to eat the meat. But the tumas nevela that Rambam says is probably medivrei seifrim. Sharei tumas avodah the tumas tikrufta is only midrabanan, as we'll learn soon in this series. And it is only because of idol worship that we have to separate ourselves from the kutim, which is why we can't eat their shchita. Yeah, true. The Rambam says there's no doubt that a kuti or a goy that shechts is garnished as far as eating is concerned biblically. So what? We're just learning treifas asura min hatoyra, and it's not metame. And therefore, what's the point that Rambam is getting at? Since this tuma charav be'enai is midrabanan, so now you cannot be mechayif kares al tumas well be a sanid shechels kadasha. Only beraya, but the raya means you have to have a raya for sure that it's a tumah d'oraisa to be mechayif kares, or a raya berura to be mechayiv the shoygeg in a carbon oil of a yored. And adarabba, not only don't you have a raya, the Rambam writes but karav be'enai that it's divrei seif. Halacha yudal. Kulis anavela. Kulis is a thigh bone, a bone that's completely closed from all sides, and in it you have marrow. So the din is hanageya, but if you touch the bone itself, or if you carry it, if you carry it, you're taught. You're carrying a ksayis. If there's a ksayis, there's a rule. Shekol davar min anavela. That cannot impart tumah through touch, which is what's happening with the bone, right? You have to. The bone is not matame. Einoi metama b'masom. However, the moment there is a small perforation, now it's shayach negia. So we say more. Hanegia ba'oyanoisa tamei. That what? Let's go back. That a kulis that's not perforated cannot impart tumah. That's only if the marrow in it is not the way it should be. The marrow in it is loose in it, which means that when you shake the bone, you hear it rattle. Why is that significant? It's very significant because that means that if the animal would have been left alive, the meat over the bone never would have healed. But if the marrow is the way it was while the animal was living, then if the animal would have been connected to a living animal, that kulis, that's the rule. The marrow inside affects its healing from the outside. Then yes, betama b'maga, and therefore ubamasa like any other limb. Wow. In other words, what did we learn before? We learned there's a din of a kazayis. A kazayis basar is matame. Bones are not matame. But my friends, we also learned that an aved, even an aved menachai, is metama. Hold on. You have to have basad gidim and atzomais. That's the point. that if this would have regenerated, it's considered to have basar. Beautiful. Now, ukvar perashnu, that the kulis is referring to any bone, which is normally the thigh bones, that are what? That are sasumi called sedadov, which is why, again, if the meat is miskashkesh, since you cannot touch it, it's not even matama b'mas. Final halacha yud beis. Kulis shechisha valel and al-chumra. If it's not perforated, but you intend to make a little hole in it, even though a guy died in nikva, why? When you intend to perforate it, is considered kemechusar maisa. If it's mechusar maisa, it's not going to be matama. And if it's considered nekuva, then maybe the chiddush here is not only is it matama b'masa, it goes together. It might, you have a doubt whether you're tamei, and therefore, if you touched it, let's say, and then you touched